I'm Danae Jones from CityLife TV, and today we're joined with WGC Lawyers, and we're talking about the importance of a written contract. Welcome to the show, Rhys.
Thanks, Danae. Thank you for having me.
Now, Rhys, what's the difference between a written contract and other agreements?
Well, Danae, a contract is very specific in that it has 6 key elements that all need to be satisfied for it to be considered a contract at law. The first is offer and acceptance of that offer. The second is showing an intention between the parties to be legally bound. The third is consideration. There needs to be a transaction of sorts, whether it's money for a good and service or something of that nature. The fourth is the parties need to actually have legal capacity. So as a quick example, if you want to be entering into a contract, you need to be 18, or you can't be suffering from any sort of mental health issues that require you to have a guardian, things like that. The fifth is to actually consent to the terms of the contract. You need to know what's in the contract to be bound by the terms. And last but not least, you actually need to be entering into a contract that is legal. You can't be enforcing a contract that is doing something illegal.
Fair enough. That makes sense. Well, for most people anyway.
Well, that's right. You wouldn't be rushing off to the police to try and enforce an illegal contract, that's for sure.
So does a contract actually need to be in writing to be valid?
Not at all. As I said, those 6 elements can be present in verbal contracts, and they often are. But a lot of the time, it's going to be much, much easier to enforce or consider or complete the terms of a contract if it is in writing. An example of a verbal contract is going to the bakery and buying a loaf of bread. You offer to buy the bread for $4. The baker accepts the offer of you offering to buy the bread. Then you get given the bread in exchange for the $4. You're clearly intending to buy the bread. The parties all have legal capacity, although interestingly enough, you can buy bread as a minor, and then walk away. The deal is complete. That is a legitimate contract at law.
And you've got a receipt to prove.
Correct, and it's all been documented there. Now, that's a very, very simple example, but a contract nonetheless. Now, as for more complicated matters, you wouldn't necessarily be running out to buy a house or buy business or enter into a lease just on a handshake, because there's just so much uncertainty of the terms of that agreement. It can still be a contract, but it would just be much, much more difficult to enforce or perform even.
And so I guess the key message here is that getting it in writing really removes any area of doubt, I guess.
As much as possible. So the problem with the law in general is that there's always a lot of grey. Otherwise people like me wouldn't have jobs. But having something in writing, having key terms and provisions listed out, removes a lot of that grey. You're effectively stuck dealing with the document you have, and then you can work on that as a base. It's a foundation for making sure things go to plan, but if they don't go to plan, at least you can look back at that and see what the original intention of the parties was when they entered into it. And that's why intention to be bound by terms is such a key, crucial element of a contract itself.
So when is a contract not enforceable?
Well, the first and easiest answer to that question is when those elements aren't present. So, as I said, there are 6 key terms. There needs to be the offer and acceptance. If that's not there, easily not a contract. The same goes for legal capacity or intention to be bound and consenting to the contract terms. If any of those elements aren't present, then it won't be considered a contract. And of course, having other matters like frustration or mistake or misrepresentation by the parties will also cause a contract to be void or voidable. So an example of that, of course, is if you are entering into a contract based on information that had been misrepresented or incorrect. So again, it's going to cause one of those other elements to fall over if you haven't been provided the correct information.
So we were chatting before about COVID, and it's presented so many varying situations for dispute with materials not arriving on time and all of those different things. I guess, does that then fall into the category of frustration for people?
It certainly can. So it depends on what the contract is. So frustration in particular comes about where something has happened outside of the control of the parties before they had even entered into the contract. And they entered into the contract without the knowledge that one of the key terms and provisions was completely incapable of being completed. So an example we were discussing is the build trade.
Yeah.
So if you had entered into a contract to build a house and were using a very, very specific material, and unbeknownst to either yourself or the builder or another party, the provision of that material was now impossible. That would be an example of frustration of contract, because a key term or a key condition can't actually be completed despite the party's best intentions. And so that's where a contract wouldn't be enforceable and would just be void.
Okay. So some very good takeaway advice there for a lot of people out there. I know that there are a lot of contractual disputes underway out there in the marketplace. I guess the advice is definitely get some professional assistance. So what should I do before I sign a contract?
Well, first and foremost is have a clear written outline of what the terms and conditions are going to be. Before you see anybody else necessarily, you need to sit down with the other party and have a discussion and get a map of exactly what you're trying to achieve. Then I would highly recommend that both parties go out and seek their own legal advice and accounting advice or any other professional service advice that you generally seek to rely on in these circumstances.
Yep.
And ask them, what are things that I haven't thought of that I might need to think about 1 month, 6 months, 2 years down the track that might help this complete without a hitch. And that's what we recommend to our clients all the time, because there are things that you just don't think of because you're so engrossed and so excited about what this project is or what the next deal is going to be that you lose track of what could happen if things go wrong. And that's where we come in.
And that's great advice, Rhys. I think the key takeaway for me here is that businesses or any individual out there really needs to be forward planning and scenario planning for all of these big events in life.
That's right. And Danae, it's so much easier for everyone involved if people do the hard work at the start and be proactive, no matter what they're involved in dealing with issues that could potentially come up. At least take the time to think about it, because I can guarantee saying, oh, that's future me's problem is going to come back to bite very, very hard if something does go wrong. And particularly when disputes arise. Dispute resolution is a key element of written contracts. It sets out a very clear pathway to dealing with a dispute, and it even has the ability to compartmentalise that dispute, isolate it from the rest of the agreement, and allow a project to continue uninterrupted while that dispute is being dealt with. And often if you have those dispute resolution provisions in a written contract, you don't ever go to court, because there are so many steps you have to go through to resolve the dispute, and eventually the parties realise this was a complete waste of time. Why are we disputing over this in the first place? It's taking away from what we tried to achieve at the start. And so that's why we recommend seeing a lawyer at the start, set these things out, and then hopefully you've avoided a problem.
That's really great advice, and we appreciate you taking the time today, Rhys.
Thank you, Danae.
Thanks for joining us. If you'd like any more information about contract law or the importance of getting into a written contract with any of your events in life, please feel free to reach out to the experienced team at WGC Lawyers. There's also some more information on this topic at our website, citylifemedia.com.au.